All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this conference call. My name is Evan Mulch. I'm a field coordinator for the John Birch Society, and I'm pleased to have Publius Huldah as what most people know her by. And so, but Joanna is on the phone with us, and she is going to talk about her expertise in helping to explain to people the dangers of calling an Article 5 Constitutional Convention, which is being misrepresented to us as a convention of states right now. In the 90s, it was misrepresented to us as a conference of states. And if you go back to even the 1970s, it was called a National Constitutional Convention. So there's different names that they put on this idea of calling an Article 5 convention, but we remind people in the John Birch Society that it's always a constitutional convention if you're using Article 5 to call this. And so anyways, Joanna, welcome to the call. You know, a lot of us have paid attention to your blog posts and, you know, your documents that you send out, and especially to the messages you send out to activists around the United States to get them to message state representatives about what's going on in their state in regards to this Article 5 convention. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
It's my honor, Evan. Thank you.
And to start out, you know, you live in Tennessee, and so you've watched this go on in your state where they actually did call for an Article 5 convention. So that's a resolution that has been passed there. And so you saw how these people worked in your state. When did you decide to get in and to make a make a fuss about this, to start making people aware of how dangerous this is?
Well, I was never involved in the previous fights to stop an Article 5 convention because I was practicing law, and I was so busy doing that, I didn't even know these fights about stopping an Article 5 convention were going on. It wasn't until Obama got elected that I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to start teaching the Constitution. So I wasn't doing anything civic-minded until Obama got elected the first time. And then when I started hearing the rumors several years ago about we've got to have a convention to get a balanced budget amendment, and this is the remedy our framers gave us to solve the problem. So at that point, I started digging into this, and I got to the absolute bottom to get to all the facts. I researched and pulled out the original source documents, and that is basically all I have been doing for the last several years, trying to stop an Article 5 convention. Because I know what the true agenda is, which is to get a new Constitution.
Right. Now, you jumped into this, and then you realized that the state representatives and you know, even activists that you've worked with needed a better education on this topic. And so
not just a better education. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Evan. Not just a better education. The ignorance is astonishing among state legislators and the general public. They don't even know the fundamental principles. They don't even know that our federal Constitution is one of enumerated powers only. They don't know that.
And so in the process of getting involved, you became a teacher, you know, a very driven teacher. And so
yes.
you've created, we're going to share 3 documents you've created, but this isn't all that you've done. And you've actually had the courage to, you know, there was never a debate between you and Mark Meckler, but I remember I was in Myrtle Beach 3 years ago, or maybe it was, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago for a convention there, and you were supposed to speak. And I remember something happened, and you were canceled, but I think it was due to the fact. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I was invited to speak on the Article 5 convention at the South Carolina Tea Party Coalition Convention.
Right.
And the host, Joe Duggan, asked me if I would debate Mark Meckler, and I said, of course. But then, shortly before the event was to take place, Joe Duggan canceled me. He said that Mark Meckler had contacted him and ranted and raved,
Right.
smeared me, demanded that I be canceled, and demanded that he be allowed to speak without my speaking. And
Right.
so Joe Duggan, for whatever reason, canceled the entire Article 5 convention event.
Yeah, and
And I was not allowed to speak.
right. And when you have a congressman in the state of South Carolina like Jeff Duncan, who's always been a big supporter of that Tea Party convention, but Jeff Duncan supports the call for an Article 5 convention. I'm sure Joe Duggan had an enormous amount of pressure on him, and it's too bad Mark Meckler has that sort of character to do something like that. We're witnessing it this time. In fact, our third conference call today will be with Sean Meehan, who's actually challenging Mark Meckler to a debate, and Mark Meckler still has yet to agree to debate him, and we don't think he's going to debate. And I know Robert Brown's going to be involved in that debate as well if it does happen.
A number of people, a legislator in Tennessee tried to get Mark Meckler to come here and debate me. He refused.
And so
he won't debate.
Why do you think he doesn't want to debate you?
Because I was invited to participate in a debate on this issue with one of COS's experts in Texas several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
After, he spoke, and then I spoke, and then we had Q's and A's, and then we had a straw poll. Well, he got about 13% of the vote. I got about 75% of the vote. I got that audience on my side. And so since that time, several years ago, no one from COS will debate me. And the word is, from what I hear, is that Mark Meckler has demanded that no one from COS is to debate anyone from the opposition.
Yeah, it's too bad they're doing this. I mean, the John Birch Society, we work on other issues as well. It's not just, this stopping a call for an Article 5 convention.
Right.
But me as a field coordinator, I've been booted out of events because of this frustration these organizers have with having to deal with the people promoting a con, the Convention of States people, because they get mad that a John Birch Society person is even allowed at these events. And so I've lost public speaking opportunities because they just can't stand the fact that we're even, and a lot of times I'm speaking on other topics. We cover items such as support your local police, stop these free trade deals like the USMCA, and totally outside the box. And in a lot of these Convention of States people have no understanding of what's really going on outside of this Convention of States. They listen to Mark Meckler, they listen to Mark Levin, and it's pretty incredible how well we are doing, given the fact they have Mark Levin on the radio pushing for this. They've got a lot of support from top politicians. I should define that. Top, politicians with a lot of influence. I wouldn't call them top because most of them don't even come close to obeying the Constitution. But it's
prominent.
Yeah, but they've got a lot of people in their corner. As you can, if you go to the Convention of States website, you can see where their endorsements come from. But I know not to trust a lot of these people that they have as endorsers, because I've been in this for about 10 years, paying attention to what's going on. Anyways, let's get into the documents you've shared, because.
Okay.
And I'm sharing your website now for those watching this on video. It's the website's publiushuldah.wordpress.com, but I'm going to switch here to one of your documents. Which one would you like to start with?
The one with the Madison meme and the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
That is the starting point. That's the key to winning this war. The Declaration of Independence.
You've created this document so people can print it off and share it with their state representatives and their state senators. And I always recommend that they meet with their state representative locally and their state senator locally. We shouldn't have to travel to the Capitol to
Right.
stop these matters, our representatives should already know what's going on before they get there and start having to deal with these convention of states supporters who are often bullies and put a lot of pressure on our elected officials. But go into detail on why this document's important.
Okay. People tend to think that because Article 5 speaks of a convention for proposing amendments, that all the delegates to a convention can do is propose amendments. But that's not true. The flyer shows how James Madison invoked the self-evident right of a people recognized in our Declaration of Independence to throw off one government and set up a new one as justification for what they did at the Federal Amendments Convention of 1787. Instead of proposing amendments to the Articles of Confederation, which was our first Constitution, as they had been instructed by the Continental Congress and the states to do, they wrote a new Constitution, the one we now have, which created a new form of government and which had its own new and easier mode of ratification. If there is a convention today, the delegates can do the same thing. Who will be at the convention? Well, we don't know, but Congress, which just overwhelmingly approved the USMCA Transfer of Sovereignty Agreement, has the power to decide how the delegates are selected. Congress can select the delegates. Congress can select themselves as delegates. Whoever is selected to be the delegates will have that same power to invoke the same right James Madison invoked and propose a new constitution which moves us into a new form of government, and the new constitution will have its own new and easier mode of ratification. So everybody needs to learn the argument in the meme and in the flyer with the James Madison meme. Learn it and explain it to legislators.
Now, a lot of people haven't read the Federalist Papers, and I've never read all of them, but I've become quite, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Federalist Paper number 40, at the 15th paragraph, look it up. Well, I quote it in my flyers. James Madison specifically invoked that right to justify what they did at the Federal Amendments Convention of 1787. People don't have to read all of the Federalist Papers. They don't even have to read all of Federalist Paper number 40. But do look at that 15th paragraph.
And at the end, you put, what's the real agenda of those, primarily George Soros and the Kochs, who are financing the push for a convention? And
right.
You believe that a lot of the money's coming from George Soros and the Kochs. How have you come to that conclusion?
Oh, there is a great deal of information on the internet about funding, particularly from the Kochs. The Kochs fund all sorts of institutions which push for an Article 5 convention, such as ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. They are big pushers. Freedom Works, Americans for Prosperity, and a host, the Heartland Institute, and a host of institutions in this country which are pushing for an Article 5 convention. They are major funders of the so-called Federalist Society. The Federalist Society, which is supposed to be, super conservative, they published a long paper by Rob Natelson in support of an Article 5 convention. I sent them a paper responding to Natelson's paper, and they declined to publish it. So the Federalist Society won't publish papers in opposition to an Article 5 convention. But if anybody wants to see the documents on the internet, showing that the Kochs are major funders of the push for an Article 5 convention, contact me. I've got, in many of my flyers, I have links to some of the online sources showing the funding.
And so Alec came here to South Carolina, I think 3 or 4 years ago, to help get this Article 5 convention called from this state, and they brought so many employees.
Remember,
yeah, go ahead.
Remember, the states apply, Congress calls.
You're right. You're right.
The states apply. Yeah, it's very important because the states are in the subordinate position. All they can do is apply.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. Alec brought more employees to South Carolina to try to get this convention called, and they brought more employees to the meeting than state representatives showed up. So the employees of Alex actually outnumbered the state representatives that were curious to learn more from them about why, an Article 5 Constitutional Convention needed to be called. They called a convention of states, but they're putting a lot of money behind it, and it should be no surprise that the model legislation for calling an Article 5 convention is coming from Alec. Not many people are even aware of this group. In fact, a lot of state representatives and state senators don't quite grasp what Alec is all about. But anyways, it's something that needs to be on everybody's radar.
Yes, it is.
So moving on to another document that you've created, which one would you like to move on to next?
Well, about the flyer with the no meme, that's important because I set forth 11 points which expose the idiocy of the claims the COS people are making and the lies that they are telling. So it's important for people to read that paper and learn the 11 arguments to make because, throughout the years as I've been addressing groups and answering their questions, those are the issues which come up all the time, those 11 points. COS lemmings are very ignorant of our Constitution, but they do learn COS talking points like the back of their hand, and they repeat them at a moment's notice. Well, we have to do the same, except that we will be telling the truth, and we do have the winning arguments. When I'm speaking to people about the COS application, the first thing I do is to show them that one-page chart which I link to in paragraph 1 of the flyer. Mm-hmm. That one-page chart lists the enumerated powers delegated to the federal government. It's a very short list. And when I show people this list, I see the lights coming on in their minds. They didn't know that our Constitution already limits the federal government to a few enumerated powers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that chart is important. And, the other 11 points, please, folks, learn them.
Well, let's go through a few of them. Number one, COS is telling you that we can fix our problems at an Article 5 convention where we can get amendments to, quote, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, end quote. And so your argument is the Constitution already limits the federal government to a small handful of enumerated powers.
Yes.
And so if we were to just follow the Constitution right now as it is, and I'm going to use Congressman Jeff Duncan as an example because he's in South Carolina. I'll pick on him because if you go to the Freedom Index on the newamerican.com, which is the John Birch Society's grading of whether or not a congressman obeys the Constitution, he's not even at, I think his cumulative index score is not even at 80% right now. And he votes for bills that send money overseas to like the World Trade Organization. And he's not obeying the Constitution himself. And here he's the one saying, we have no choice but to call a convention of states because we need term limits. We need a balanced budget amendment. But he's the rascal that's actually spending our money, recklessly.
Yeah.
And I have the same, You know, my
And Tom
congressman,
Coburn was just as bad.
yeah,
And Jim
and all,
DeMint just as bad.
yeah, Jim DeMint was actually really bad at one point. He was in the 50s and
Yeah.
60s on the Freedom Index, and he actually got better as time went on. But I wonder if he got better in order to make people think that he was a constitutionalist. I don't think that really was. Um, it's definitely not what's in its heart, or else he'd help in the John Birch Society. For those that are listening, if you're a Jim DeMint supporter, just keep in mind that he never even accepted an opportunity to speak at a Tea Party meeting in his hometown, Greenville, South Carolina. So Greenville, South Carolina, they've always had a great Tea Party there, but he's never ever even went to his own Tea Party to speak. That, I think that has a lot to say about him. Anyways, we'll keep going here. Number 2, COS's entire case is based on a fake quote. They claim our framers told us that when the federal government violates the Constitution, the solution is to amend the Constitution. So I'm going to click
They
on the
made
flyer
that
here.
up. I've got the fake quote, which Michael Ferris apparently just made up.
Mm-hmm. And so the
Or
meme,
somebody else made it.
and so I'm looking at the meme right now, and it has Michael Ferris saying this. He says here, George Mason demanded that this provision, the convention, be included in Article 5 because he correctly forecast the situation we face today. He predicted that Washington, D.C. would violate its constitutional limitations, and the states would need to make adjustments to the constitutional text in order to rein in the abuse of power by the federal government. So without me reading this whole thing, how did I mean, what was his thinking when he made it up? Do you even understand his line of thinking?
Oh, I have no idea what his thinking is. His
Mm-hmm.
statement is totally false. I have read the journal which Madison kept of the Federal Amendments Convention of 1787. No one ever said such a thing as Ferris claims. What George Mason and the other delegates actually said is that the purpose of amendments is to correct defects in the Constitution. So either Michael Ferris made that quote up himself, or he's really, really stupid and doesn't understand what he reads, or somebody else made it up and Michael Ferris just copied it.
He thought it was true. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, you know.
and what we see so many times is they never admit that they're wrong. You know, I've not seen that from one convention of states leader where they actually, you know, they have some sort of they deliver an apology for misquoting or misrepresenting what the founders believed. Number 3 here, our framers understood that when you want another constitution, you need to get a convention. And you put here, the flyer with the Ferris and Mason meme sets forth quotes from George Mason and others, which show that they knew that to get a new constitution, you need a convention. That's a good question. So if we want a new constitution right now, if we actually did, how would we get that new constitution today?
Well, the easiest way to get a new constitution is under the pretext of merely getting amendments to our existing Constitution. And that is the technique which the convention lobby is using. Under the pretext of merely getting amendments at an Article 5 convention, they are seeking the opportunity where they can impose a completely new constitution which will have its own new mode of ratification. This whole thing about getting amendments to restrain federal spending, it's just a trick so they can deceive people so they can get an Article 5 convention.
Yeah, they've even said on their Facebook page, it's from them, you know, that they are up for redefining the Second Amendment. So how could that be something they're considering if it's limited to balanced budget amendment or just term limits? They're fooling us is what they're doing.
Well, if we have time, I want to get into how the USMCA trade agreement, the North American Union, and Article 5 Convention, and red flag gun laws, how they're all related. All four of those points are part of a master plan to take away our sovereignty.
We do have time. You had one more document here that's titled The Unintended Consequences of a Balanced Budget Amendment, What You Really Need to Know. So this is the third document. Let's explain this, and then we'll move on to that.
Well, the hook which the convention lobby has been using to trap conservatives and Republicans is the federal spending is out of control, and it is. We all know that. With unfunded liabilities, the national debt is something like $222 trillion. So, yes, federal spending is out of control. But the convention lobby is telling us that, well, we can fix that with a balanced budget amendment. Well, that's a complete lie. First of all, our Constitution already limits federal spending to the enumerated powers. If all of you will go through the Constitution and highlight all the powers delegated to Congress and the President, you'll get a complete list of the objects on which Congress is authorized to spend money. So our Constitution already limits federal spending to the enumerated powers. The problem is everybody ignores the existing constitutional limits.
Absolutely.
Americans want to have their cake and they want to eat it too. All of the states are voracious consumers of federal funds. Individuals are voracious consumers of federal funds. So spending is out of control. What they want is to keep those federal dollars flooding into their state, and they want to preen their moral outrage over out-of-control federal spending so that everybody thinks they're a good guy. You can't have it both ways.
And we often explain to people there's no way to balance a budget unless everybody obeys the Constitution. But you also have to get rid of the 16th and 17th Amendment because the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve Bank makes it to where there's no way of ever controlling, what
the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 did was the progressives took over our country in the early 1900s. They wanted to impose a socialist regulatory welfare state. But in order to do that, they needed enormous amounts of money, credit. So the Federal Reserve Bank was created in 1913 in order to provide a source of unlimited credit to the federal government. So the socialist regulatory welfare state we have now has been funded for 100 years on this unlimited source of credit coming from the Federal Reserve Bank. But we don't need to get rid of the 16th and 17th Amendments in order to downsize the federal government to its enumerated powers. Yeah, we could start closing down unconstitutional federal agencies right now.
Yes. So let's get back, because we just have a few minutes left, let's get back to the USMCA and all these other items you talked about. Tie them in together and let people know what's really happening here.
Okay, it's really important. I'm going to connect the dots between four major changes which are being pushed on us, and I hope to show you why we have to make stopping an Article 5 convention the main focus of our lives. The USMCA trade agreement advances the economic and financial integration of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. It sets up global regulation of environmental regulation, immigration policy, et cetera, et cetera. It also binds the three countries to submit to an international monetary system, which is to be administered and enforced by the International Monetary Fund, and which will replace our collapsing Federal Reserve System. Every word in that agreement is unconstitutional, as in violation of our existing Constitution. Now, the North American Union brings about the political integration of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The Task Force report on building a North American community, sponsored by the Council on Foreign Relations, provides for, among other horrors, combining the functions of law enforcement and the military so as to create a militarized police force consisting of Canadians, Mexicans, and Americans. It also provides for a parliament to be set up over Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, like the parliament set up over countries in the European Union, to merge the functions of the police and the military and to combine them with those of Mexico and Canada, and to permit a parliament to be set up over and above the United States is altogether repugnant to our existing Constitution. And that's the purpose of an Article 5 convention, to get a new Constitution which transforms the United States from a sovereign nation to a member state of the North American Union. But Americans don't want to be moved into the North American Union. So the factions which are pushing for an Article 5 convention, such as the Convention of States Project, don't tell us what the true purpose of a convention is. They are marketing it as the way to rein in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. But as anyone who has read our Constitution knows, it already limits the powers and jurisdiction of the federal government to a small handful of powers. But since Americans don't read our Constitution, they don't know that. So they are easily deceived by people who promise them that with the convention, they will get amendments which limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. So what does that mean, to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government? The folks out there thinks it means we're going to have smaller government. That's not what it means. The globalists who are financing the COS actually do intend to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and they intend to do it by transferring the powers our Constitution delegates to Congress to the global government they have been setting up over us for the last 80 years. That's what the USMCA trade agreement does. It transfers powers our Constitution delegates to Congress to global government. It also transfers to global government powers our Constitution never delegated to the federal government, but reserved to the states or the people. But before the globalists can achieve the political integration of the three countries, they need a new constitution for the United States. That's what's behind the push for an Article 5 convention. And my flyer with no meme links to a paper of mine which specifically addresses this. And
which article is that? The one?
Why South Carolina legislators should oppose H3125.
Okay.
Right at the very end of that, I've got the link to my paper, linking these 4 points together.
I have it here. Okay,
so,
I got it.
Red flag laws and gun confiscation. When Americans finally see what has been done and how they have been deceived, they will be angry. And that's why they must be disarmed now before they figure it out.
Well,
so that's how I think the globalists plan to complete their coup against us.
Joanna, thank you so much for taking part in this. I love the way you talk, by the way. I think you've got a very clear way of sending out the message. I don't know where you grew up, but wherever you grew up, you had a great English, or whoever taught you where you learned to speak was, it's incredible to hear you talk. So thank you for.
Well, thank you.
for doing what you do, for continuing to teach us, and for taking on, the bullies right now that are trying to tear down our Constitution and to destroy American sovereignty. We're going to move on to the Q&A session of this conference call. For everybody listening, this broadcast this recording will be on the Bircher podcast. The Bircher podcast can be uploaded on Apple iTunes. So if you have an iPhone, you can get the Bircher podcast that way. or you can download it from Podomatic if you're using a phone that's not an Apple smartphone. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for being part of this conference call. We're going to move to the Q&A session, so I will stop the recording. Anyways, once again, Joanna, thank you so much, and just stay on the line with us because we've got a few minutes here.
Okay.